All right, Jehu.
Jehu.
One of my favorite Bible stories of ever.
Yes. So we're still in the divided monarchy, and you guys are going to be like, are we always in the divided monarchy? And the fact of the matter is, it's a lot of the Old Testament. So we've come this far. We got through the 5 books of the law, most of the history books, but we still have 2nd Kings and 2nd Chronicles that we're diving around in. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther come up later. We finished off all the poetry books, and today we are finally touching on some of the prophetic books of the Old Testament. We'll have Joel, Amos, and Jonah, because we're finally getting into written prophetic books.
I'm excited to see a map on Daniel 10.
What?
I'm excited to see a map on Daniel 10.
A map? Oh my goodness, I'll have to generate that then. We're not getting to Daniel for a long time.
7.
It's like the exile and
Yeah.
House of the Return.
It's a while. Alright, so we're going through Jehu's dynasty today. The fall of the northern kingdom is next week, and then we have 2 weeks off because of spring break, and so we will be back here after spring break on the 26th again. And I will have to get a reading sheet out for a whole month. Alright, so Jehu's dynasty has a lot of characters in it.
Next week's pineapple.
What now?
Next week's the pineapple?
Next week's the pineapple.
Oh, wow.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
Oh no.
next week is the pineapple.
What?
So what we gotta do? We gotta create a Quizlet.
Quizlet doesn't work for me.
Don't scheme about it now, please, Mackay.
Scripture to your work.
So, Jehu reigns 28 years in Samaria from 884 to 856. Jehoahaz, his son, reigns for 17 years. And this is all on the timeline.
Yep.
Pull this off.
Timeline out.
Yep, get your timeline out. His son Jehoash actually has a reign that overlaps with his father by 3 years. His reign is numbered at 16 years.
How did they figure that out?
I can show it to you.
Is it like in relation to other events?
Well, it's that I think Jehoahaz takes the throne in such and such a year of Joash, and then only 14 years later, his son is taking the throne and has the first year of his reign. But we know that Jehoahaz was on the throne for 17 years. So you have to triangulate those two together and figure out that there was probably a overlap, which is not uncommon because fathers oftentimes wanted to get the right son on the throne so the wrong son does not end up trying to take it. Keep things a little cleaner. And then there's actually an implication that Jeroboam II was appointed viceroy a long time before he actually started reigning for his 41 years. And so he may have had nearly 60 years ruling Israel. But 41 years is his reign. And then you'll notice that his reign ends in 784. His son Zechariah reigns for 6 months, 11 years later. There's a gap, and we don't know what was happening then. It was apparently pretty chaotic because they didn't get good records written down, and no one is assumed to be ruling.
Someone will find a stele next year. And
Maybe,
iron that all out.
maybe.
Really?
Well,
You heard it from Alex first. He prophesied it. Somebody will find the
What's
rock
the
that'll,
stele?
a stela.
Oh, is that the thing? What?
they're
Did
pronounced
the pen
stele,
die,
stele,
Annabelle?
or
Do you need a
stele.
replacement? You can't open it. But you do need a replacement pen.
Give it to you.
Oh, yeah.
Don't spilling.
Time
Yes.
To get humbled.
Yes, don't spill ink. Set the pen down. No more messing with the pen. Annabelle, ready to catch? Pen's under your chair.
They're taped, so you'll have to
It's okay, thank you.
use a key or something.
Yeah.
They kept exploding on me.
I got it.
All right.
But anyway, you were
Anyhow,
saying,
so there's a period of chaos there. We'll talk about that some a little later tonight, and we'll expand on that next week. So we talked about how Jehu takes over the throne. He's anointed by a messenger of Elisha, and he kills off Joram, the king of Israel, kills or that's Joram or Jehoram, because there's alternate spellings, kills Ahaziah, the king of Judah, destroys the house of Ahab, kills off all the prophets of Baal, and this fulfills Elijah's prophecy about all of Ahab's descendants who are in the field getting eaten by the birds when they're dead, and the ones in the city being eaten by the dogs. And that was the third time that that prophecy was given to a house ruling Israel and fulfilled. So Jehu is better than any king that's been around for a while, but he's definitely not perfect. He was a commander of the army before he became king, gets rid of the Baal worship, tears down the temple. So previous king got rid of the sacred stone. Apparently it was in storage or something somewhere, because then Jehu burns the sacred stone, which I presume would be to, you get a rock really hot and then pour water on it, it'll fracture and shatter, potentially. So he was trying to destroy it and damage it even further. And then just to make sure that no one would ever consider rebuilding the temple to Baal in Samaria, he turned the location into a latrine, permanently making it defiled. Yes.
That's a low opinion of Baal, and I approve.
Yes, low opinion of Baal, I approve. Continues in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which is interesting. I heard somebody or read somebody articulate it this way, where turning away from Baal worship is following the first commandment, but the second commandment of Moses was not to set up any graven images, and that's what the sin of Jeroboam was, is the graven images of the calf gods. He continues in that, so breaking the second commandment, but not the first one any longer. But because he fulfilled the word of the command of God to destroy Ahab's house, the Lord promises that 4 generations of his descendants would rule on the throne of Israel.
Quick caveat, Zechariah is part of his, dynasty, right?
Yes.
I have to wonder if God is offended that people keep making him cows.
Yeah, Baal keeps coming back.
Baal keeps coming back, but Aaron turns him into a calf god, and then Jeroboam turns him into a calf god. And I'm sure that God appreciates cows in bovine forms of all types around the world, but I'm sure he also does not want to be
Seen as equal to them.
not a cow. Yep. So I wanted to pull this out. There was a bit of dynastic stability here for a while. Jeroboam and his son get a cumulative reign of 24 years. Baasha and his son get 26 years. You have a lot more people in Omri's line, but that only amounts to 45 years on the throne. Oh, and I have Jeroboam. It's supposed to be Jehu. Jehu, the 4th line there, him and his descendants are on the throne for 100 years in Israel. And then the next one, we'll learn about next week, Menahem and his son only get 12 years on the throne. So in one sense, that's a bit more stability for Israel for a time, but in another sense that we see there's a lot less stability.
Shalom gets 1 month.
Yeah,
That'd be me and
Next
kicked out of
one.
office.
next week. There's a lot of characters coming next week. So during Jehu's reign, Hazael, the king of Aram, starts getting the upper hand over Israel, and he conquers everything east of the Jordan. Manasseh, half of the tribe of Manasseh, Reuben, and Gad all fall to Aram. So Israel is reduced to just their holdings on the west side of the Jordan River. The reduction continues in his son's reign. Jehoahaz continues in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. An Asherah pole pops up in Samaria, so that would be worshiping another goddess in Canaan, Canaanite goddess. And Aram continues to prevail over Israel. I don't think the territory lost is specified, but Israel loses more territory to them. And Israel's army ends up getting reduced to a mere 10,000 infantry, 50 horsemen, and 10 chariots.
I'm not trying to slow you down, but God's punishment for that Asherah pole, their army gets reduced, not necessarily.
Yeah, there were a lot of things there. It said that God was putting pressure on Israel. I don't remember the exact way it's phrased. I don't know that it's explicitly connected to the Asherah pole, but this was happening in Jehu's reign as well. I got generated a chart here for comparison. This just shows the relative military strength through various reigns. Most of these kings we have talked about, and a few more we'll talk about later tonight, but
Why is the separated Judah and Israel in Saul and David's reign?
because they did. They sorted them out. Saul mustered an army, and it specifies in the scriptures 10,000 men from Judah and 200,000 men from Israel.
Were men from Judah just like better in some way due to genetics or something, that they were better warriors, or?
I think it was the author who knew that the kingdom separated later because they wrote it, or were getting to writing it. And so as they were looking through the records, they just naturally were sorting them out between Judah and Israel. Even in David's reign, it specifies how many of Benjamin, but not the rest of the tribe specifically, because Benjamin was part of Judah. So
Was it 180,000 of Benjamin?
something like that. And Jehoshaphat's reign, they sorted them out between Judah and Benjamin. I lumped them together. But you can see here, like, under Saul, they don't muster quite as large of an army, but Israel still has 200,000. In David's reign, he has 1,100,000 men in Israel, plus another 500,000 in Judah. In Abijah's day, that's that huge battle that takes place where 400,000 men of Judah defeat 800,000 men of Israel, killing 500,000 men of Israel.
This is like battles of like the scale of the end game, or the end days prophecy of like 2 million men on.
No, this is not that scale at all. In the book of Revelation, that's 200 million mounted.
Oh, 200 million.
Yes, 200 million mounted troops.
Okay, never mind.
Yep.
What are these troops going to be mounted on?
That's not
the question.
specified, and that is distressing. Yeah, good question. What are
Could
they
be
mounted
tanks.
on?
I was gonna say tanks,
Well,
Tanks, helicopters.
airplanes.
you can fit
Horse.
like 20 guys in a single Jeep or truck.
You digress.
Yeah, I wonder what John was thinking.
But anyway, so Jehoahaz, in his day, the army's reduced down to 10,050 plus a few chariots. You can see that Israel is at a very low point. They bounce back, actually, because they defeat Amaziah's army of 300,000. A little later tonight here we'll hit that. And then they killed 120,000 men in Ahaz's army. So we know that it was a pretty sizable chunk of men in Israel again. But
Well, it's-
Jehoahaz definitely has a low ebb for the kingdom. Yes.
I was just reading through that recently, or glancing over it, and I'm pretty sure it said everyone went to his own like house, and so it left the army with like 10,000 infantry and 50 horsemen and 10 chariots. So it seemed like it was stressing like no one wanted to fight and no one wanted to be in the army, and so the army was just reduced down to like very few men.
I think what you're referencing is after a different defeat. In this passage about Jehoahaz's army, it says the king of Aram ground his army to dust.
Oh,
How did they bounce back?
Yeah. So they bounced back though. That was the low point, which means it can only go up. Nope, this way. Alright, so the third one in his line, Jehoash, continues the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Elisha dies during his reign, but before he dies, he prophesies victory over Aram. And then it says after that, Jehoash recovers towns lost to Aram by his father. We don't know where that is once again, but then Jehoash also has a battle against Judah in his days, empties the treasuries of the temple of the palace, and takes hostages back to Samaria. So things are rising again for Israel during Jehoash's reign. His son is Jeroboam the second. Continues the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Yes,
Do we just attach on the second, like, just to not
just to
mix-
keep them straight.
Okay.
Yep,
So,
they're not in the same lineage.
well, okay.
Same name, first one and a second one.
So they
It's
just-
not healthy.
so
It is not actually in the Hebrew in the Old Testament.
Okay, so they didn't put the second in Hebrew. Okay.
No.
Makes sense.
English clarification. He overcomes Aram, and it says in his reign the borders of Israel were restored, and this was prophesied by Jonah, the son of Amittai. So we know it's the same Jonah that wrote the book of Jonah. And the northern border, Lebo Hamath, is way up on the northern side of Aram. And so restoring the borders of Israel to their former glory is going back all the way to the days of David and Solomon, when that kingdom of Aram was subjugated to Israel. And what this ends up doing, actually, is putting the northern boundary of Israel right up next to the Assyrian Empire. And so Aram, for a good while, is no longer a force to be reckoned with. And that suddenly makes Assyria the next biggest problem. You no longer have Aram in between them. It doesn't come across in the scriptures. I've heard that Assyria was pressuring Aram from the other side. And so much like Germany and Russia parceled Poland up in 1939, it sounds like Syria and Israel just parceled up Aram in Jeroboam's reign, and Israel got a lion's share of southern Arabia. So they also conquered back all the territories of Reuben and Gad and the tribal allotments that were lost from the other side of the Jordan. And so this ends up being a high point of the kingdom of Israel. In just 2 generations, they go from low ebb to high ebb. But then once you get to your high point, it's only downhill from there. That is the problem. And we don't know how the transition transpires from Jeroboam the second to Zechariah. All we know is that there's 11 years in between, 11 and a half years actually, between the death of Jeroboam and when Zechariah ascends the throne. Presumably there's a lot of turmoil in the midst of that. He's only on the throne for 6 months, and a lot of turmoil happens after he is assassinated.
Could you go back one slide?
Sure.
If he was simply just too young, do you reckon?
Could have been a regency of some sort if he was just too young. Doesn't seem like a king who's been around for 60 years should have the youngest son who's not yet old enough to be able to get on the throne. It could be that there were 7 or 8 sons and they were all vying for the throne and he was a survivor for 6 months. We don't know. It does not say anything in the scriptures. There's no hints, and I have not heard of anything in the archaeological record that would lend anything to it. The small reigns and the inconsequential kings don't tend to end up with any stone monuments that survive.
We don't know why he left, why he didn't get, how he was defeated or anything.
I think he gets assassinated by Menahem. Since he's a transitional figure, we'll cover him again next week, and I'll fill in some gaps if I left any. So we just added a lot more J's to confuse with Jehoshaphat and Jehoram, the north, and
They're
Jehoram of
all
the south.
J's.
They are all J's. Jehu, Jehoahaz, Jehoash, Jeroboam, another Jeroboam.
They're all J.
Except for Zechariah. Yes, J-E's.
But Zechariah doesn't have like much.
And he's inconsequential.
He's not
Yep.
so much.
I don't think we're gonna see him in a coup.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
he turns to Shalom and says, I
Je-
got 5 more months of rule than you.
Yeah. Jehoash ends up having an alternative name. He's also sometimes known as Joash, but there's a king in the south that I prefer to call Joash. So,
Yeah.
but he's also known as Jehoash too. So,
I was reading that and I was like,
I
this is
prefer
hard
the
to
king
sort
of the
out.
south.
right,
I
yeah.
like that one better.
All right, so this is going to take us into prophetic writings. And I came across a generalization that I don't like, and so I'm going to point it out to you. There's all kinds of prophets that we've heard about thus far, Elijah and Elisha being the most prominent of them, and they are oftentimes grouped together and called the oral prophets, and then the other ones are called the writing prophets, like Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so forth. The catch is that so many of the prophets we've come across already have been known to have written because they're the source material for what we've been reading about. It's just their writings are not extant. They could show up sometime in a clay jar in a cave in Israel. That'd be amazing. It
So
would
if
shed
they-
new light.
Do you reckon they would be thrown into the Bible?
I would assume not.
I suppose because they had to meet in like 400.
Yeah, that was established a long, long time ago, and I trust that if God wanted their writings to get into the Bible, they would have, but just more historical writings from back then would be amazing. So here's a couple references, and this is kind of fun because this is the Bible referencing books outside of the Bible that are used as source material. So, way back in the days of Rehoboam, it summarizes him by saying, "Now the acts of Rehoboam from first to last, are they not written in the chronicles of Shemaiah the prophet and Iddo the seer?" They were continual wars between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And then a couple generations later, the Jehoshaphat, it says, "The rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat from first to last are written in the chronicles of Jehu the son of Hanani, which are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel." So a lot of these other prophets were writing things. And as I was reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, it was like, seems like the source material for Elijah and Elisha must have been somebody's written account of things that happened in these days. But it doesn't specifically attribute it to it. So, hard to say what happened with those writings, but we do know they wrote. That said, Amos is known as being the oldest prophetic book of the Bible. Jeroboam and Uzziah were the kings when he wrote. Uzziah we haven't covered yet, but Jeroboam had the longest reign of any northern king, 41 years, and his kingdom was on the ascendancy. You'll see later when we get to him, Uzziah, in his reign, Judah was on the ascendancy, and so this is the most peaceful, prosperous time for both kingdoms jointly in the entire divided kingdom period. And strangely enough, it marks that the book of Amos was written 2 years before the earthquake of King Uzziah's reign. And this earthquake gets mentioned in a later prophet, Zechariah, and it's used as a point of comparison for a future earthquake that is prophesied to happen that has not yet happened.
Oh, lovely.
It'll rip the Mount of Olives in half, and people will escape through the valley that's formed in the earthquake.
Do we know where the Mount of, we know where the Mount of
Yeah, we know where the Mount of Olives is.
So when that thing gets ripped apart,
You know the day is near. Or already passed, possibly.
Um,
It's a momentous time frame.
better hope it isn't
Mhm.
passed.
Most of the book of Amos is just talking about judgments coming on most of Israel's enemies, but Israel and Judah don't get spared judgments prophesied. And then there actually is an incident that he has with Amaziah, who was a priest at Bethel, that gets recorded in Amos chapter 7, I believe.
Is that well taught in Israel? If there's ever an earthquake, wait for the mountain to split in half and run through that.
I don't know. That would be a really funny earthquake contingency plan, though.
So what
It'd be
if,
hot down in the valley.
Might be, might not be.
so what if the mountain doesn't split now?
Not much worse off.
Yeah. Another minor prophet. The book of Joel. And funnily enough, Joel could actually be older than Amos, but we don't know because there's nothing in his book that gives us a clue to the time frame. The best you can do is narrow it down to the 6th through the 9th century BC. He doesn't ever mention Assyria or Babylon, and so it probably is before Assyria and Babylon land on the scene, and we have not seen them yet. So roughly this time frame. He references a plague of locusts that devours the crops, and he gets really detailed on his locust descriptions actually. There's great locusts, and then there's eating locusts, and there's chopper locusts and hopper locusts, and it's quite something.
Really?
Yes.
So do you reckon that this is the same locust as mentioned in Revelation?
Nope. These are the actual. Yeah, it's not those locusts. He's talking about a plague of locusts that devoured the crops of Israel in his day.
Oh.
He's referencing it as a past tense. This happened.
Oh, he's talking
Mhm.
about. Oh.
Yep.
I thought. Okay.
And one of the more famous passages out of Joel gets quoted by Peter in the book of Acts, chapter 2. And that's when it says, in the last days your sons will dream dreams and your old men will prophesy and yeah, something like that.
No,
Can't-
the old men will dream dreams, and the young men will prophesy.
Something like that, exactly.
Old men dream dreams.
Okay. My paraphrase is not working tonight, so
Do old people not get drinks as often as younger people, or?
No, the old people get the dreams, and the young
Yes,
people
but I was
not.
wondering why, is that significant for something, or?
Well, the old people get dreams from God.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
all right. Jump out of this. Think of this in terms of what we've learned in Hebrew poetry. Your old men will dream dreams, your young men will prophesy.
Well, it's comparison between the old man and the young man. I don't remember if there's
No,
a term
isn't
for
it
that.
isn't it the repeating thing?
Is this synonymous or antithetical parallelism?
Synonymous.
Synonymous. So you have old men and young men, you have dreams, and you have prophecy. Those are being equated in this. So obviously, dreams and prophecy aren't quite the same, and old men and young men are a little different, but they're definitely grouped, right?
Right.
So people are going to be getting revelation, is what this works out to be.
People equal revelation.
Yes, people will start getting revelation and word of the Lord.
And that's continued to this day. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and the next two verses of that prophecy in Joel have not yet taken place.
Where are
We'll
they?
get to them later. It's when the moon turns to blood,
Oh,
the sun turns to darkness.
well,
Okay.
that
We'll
sounds
reference
like
that in
an
the later.
eclipse.
Yes. All right, so the book of Jonah, we've already referenced a little bit tonight. It's the most unique of all the minor prophets because the prophet does not, or the book is not talking about the message of the prophet, he's talking about the prophets.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the most unique story, I'd say, of prophets.
Yes. So a lot of people dismiss the book of Jonah as just completely fictional. But we see in the king's account that he actually is a historical figure, and he prophesied that the borders of Israel would be restored, and they were restored in Jeroboam II's reign.
Okay, so remember to wait.
And Jesus also references him as a historical figure and points out huge prophetic significance to him being 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish.
Yeah.
Crazy significant, because that is like foretelling the 3 days and 3 nights Jesus is in the tomb. He delivers his message to Nineveh, which in the context of Jeroboam II having pushed the borders of Israel right up to the frontiers of Assyria, Nineveh is the capital city of the superpower of their day and age, and Israel would be terrified of them. It would be like the relationship between China and, say, Vietnam, where they're right next to each other and there's a huge disparity between the power that each country possesses and can project.
What about China and Taiwan?
China and Taiwan works too. Okay? Anyhow, so Jonah is a good nationalist and he likes the idea of Nineveh getting destroyed. And what better way to have it destroyed? You don't even have to send the armies of Israel forward to destroy it. God will just do it himself. So if I don't deliver the message, then God destroys our enemy's capital city. It all goes well for Israel. And that's his rationale. Huh?
I did not know it was that thought out.
Is that thought out? And that's that verse. I knew you were gracious and compassionate and relenting from bringing disaster. That is why he was so mad and upset. And that's why the lesson of the book of Jonah is God saying, how could I not be concerned about this great city that has got 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left?
That's pretty bad.
it's a huge population of either complete idiots or the 3 and under population. So if that's like the 3 and under population, like that's a huge population for a city.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly.
I thought they were just idiots, but
I've seen lots of interpretations for that phrase. I'm not sure what the Hebrew euphemism is supposed to be rendered as, but
The right hand of Christ, the sheep, left hand of the goats.
I don't think the connection is in that. It's a euphemism they're using, like,
I'm standing behind the tree.
right as a Spanish one. Like, there's another one that's introduced there. If you've ever heard of the skin of your teeth, it's a Hebrew euphemism for your gums. Fire from heaven is likely a euphemism for lightning. So, people who don't know their right hand from their left is referring to some type of people, and it's been a point of speculation, but there's not enough uses of it to know what it actually means. But anyway, so God was concerned about all the people and the cattle of Nineveh, and Jonah was not. So,
Did Syria and Israel gain better peaceable terms after that? And speaking terms, I guess.
I started reading this week and see about that. It goes very downhill. It's kind of interesting, actually. One writer I read it from said it was the generation that repented in Nineveh that brought the judgment on Israel, actually, which we'll read about this week and talk about next Sunday.
It could have been God-fearing people that brought judgment upon.
Yeah, God-fearing Assyrians brought judgment on the northern kingdom of Israel. So we'll look at the timeline and see if that plays out. So,
maybe that's why
That's
the
a
Assyrians were so
statement.
successful.
all right, we didn't even get to the southern kingdom, but we need to pause there. We finished the minor prophets at least. So we'll pick up with the line of David. Next
more
week.
Jays.
More J's. Joash. I think we're about halfway through all these kings. And it gets simpler after spring break. Next week is a little intense because there's a whole bunch of short reigns in the northern kingdom, and then things simplify and you only have one kingdom, just the line of David. Storyline simplifies, but Assyria lands on the scene this next week. Jonah introduces him.
Dad, where should we put the war, like the?
That's a handout.
Have a good week, everybody.
Yep, you too.
Bye, Alex. Have a good week.